Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Carl Gustav Jung. Have you ever noticed that some people can say no without a second thought, while others feel guilty for hours after refusing even the smallest request? Two people receive exactly the same message. A friend asks for help. One politely declines, wishes them well, and moves on with their day. The other also declines, but their mind refuses to let the conversation end. They replay every word they used. They wonder if they sounded selfish. They imagine the other person feeling disappointed. They consider sending another message to explain themselves. Sometimes they even change their answer entirely, not because they suddenly have more time, but because the guilt becomes too uncomfortable to carry. Why does this happen? Why can something as simple as protecting your own time feel emotionally dangerous? Most people assume the answer is kindness. They believe they simply care too much about others. They describe themselves as generous, empathetic, or selfless. While those qualities are certainly real, they rarely explain the intensity of the guilt. Healthy kindness does not leave you emotionally exhausted. Genuine compassion does not require abandoning yourself every time someone asks for more than you can realistically give. The real question is not why you feel guilty. The real question is why your brain interprets a healthy boundary as though it were a threat. This distinction changes everything. Psychologists have long understood that our emotional reactions are not random. They are predictions made by the brain based on past experience. Your nervous system is constantly asking one question: what happened the last time I behaved this way? If previous experiences taught you that expressing your own needs led to rejection, criticism, conflict, or withdrawal of affection, your brain remembers. Years later, even when the original situation is gone, your emotional system continues responding as though the same danger still exists. Carl Jung believed that much of human behavior is driven by unconscious patterns formed long before we are capable of understanding them. We often mistake these patterns for personality. We say, "I've always been like this," without asking a more important question. What if this isn't your personality at all? What if it is an adaptation? What if the person who struggles to say no was not born that way, but slowly learned that saying yes was the safest way to stay connected to the people they depended on? Children do not enter the world with a fear of disappointing others. They learn it. Developmental psychology suggests that our earliest relationships become the blueprint through which we interpret ourselves and other people. A child does not discover who they are by looking in a mirror. They discover who they are by watching the emotional reactions of the adults around them. Every smile, every criticism, every moment of comfort or emotional distance quietly answers the same question: who do I need to become in order to be loved? For some children, the answer is beautifully simple. They learn that they are loved even when they make mistakes. They are comforted when they cry, encouraged when they fail, and reassured that conflict does not threaten the relationship. Those children gradually develop something psychologists call secure attachment. They learn that relationships can survive honesty. They learn that saying no does not automatically lead to abandonment. But not every child receives that lesson. Some children quickly discover that harmony inside the family depends on keeping everyone else happy. They notice that expressing anger creates tension. They notice that disagreeing disappoints a parent. They notice that asking for too much attention is met with irritation instead of warmth. No one has to explain these rules. Children become experts at observing emotional patterns because their survival depends on understanding them. Slowly, without realizing it, they begin making unconscious decisions. I won't cry. I won't complain. I won't make things harder. I'll be easy to love. At first, these are not personality traits. They are survival strategies. The tragedy is that survival strategies rarely disappear once the danger is gone. They simply become so familiar that we mistake them for our identity. A child who repeatedly learned that peace depended on keeping everyone else comfortable often grows into an adult who feels personally responsible for everyone else's emotions. They apologize for things that are not their fault. They over-explain every decision. They agree to commitments they do not want because disappointing another person feels emotionally heavier than disappointing themselves. From the outside, these behaviors look like kindness. From the inside, they are often driven by fear. Fear of rejection, fear of conflict, fear of no longer being worthy of love. And that is precisely why learning to say no can feel so terrifying. Because somewhere deep inside the unconscious mind, the word no longer means I have a boundary. It means I might lose the connection I need. There is another reason why saying no can feel so emotionally overwhelming, and Carl Jung offered a fascinating way of understanding it. He believed that every human being develops what he called the persona. Contrary to what many people think, the persona is not a fake personality. It is a psychological adaptation. It is the version of ourselves that learns how to function in society, how to be accepted, respected, and loved. Without it, healthy relationships and communities would be almost impossible. The problem begins when the persona stops being something we wear and slowly becomes someone we believe we are. Imagine a child growing up in a home where love feels unpredictable. On some days, affection is abundant. On others, a small mistake leads to criticism, silence, or disappointment. The child cannot control the adults, but they can control themselves. So they begin experimenting. They notice that when they are helpful, the atmosphere becomes calmer. When they achieve something impressive, they receive praise. When they hide their sadness, nobody becomes uncomfortable. Slowly, almost invisibly, the child starts creating a version of themselves that seems easier to love. Years later, that child has become an adult who is known as dependable, kind, and endlessly supportive. Friends admire them. Colleagues rely on them. Family members describe them as someone who would do anything for anyone. It sounds like a compliment, and often it is. But beneath that admirable image, there may be a painful question that has never been answered. If I stop being useful, will people still want me in their lives? That question changes the meaning of every boundary. When someone asks for a favor, the situation is no longer just about time or energy. Deep inside the unconscious, it becomes a test of belonging. Saying no longer feels like declining a request. It feels like risking love, acceptance, or connection. Of course, the body reacts with guilt. From its perspective, the stakes are far greater than the situation actually requires. Modern neuroscience helps explain why this happens. The brain does not clearly separate physical danger from social danger. Research has shown that rejection, exclusion, and social disconnection activate many of the same neural regions involved in physical pain. For our ancestors, being rejected by the group often meant death. Survival depended on belonging. Although the world has changed dramatically, parts of our nervous system still react as though social rejection threatens our existence. This is why your heart may race after sending a message that simply says, "I'm sorry, I can't make it today." Rationally, you know you've done nothing wrong. Emotionally, your body behaves as though you've stepped into danger. The discomfort is real, even if the threat is not. One of the biggest misconceptions about people-pleasing is that it is driven by kindness alone. In reality, people-pleasing is often driven by anxiety. The goal is not simply to make others happy. The goal is to prevent something frightening from happening. Conflict, disappointment, anger, abandonment. The behavior looks generous, but psychologically, it is often protective. This explains why many people who struggle to say no become exhausted without understanding why. They are not only managing their own responsibilities, they are constantly trying to manage the emotions of everyone around them. They monitor facial expressions. They analyze tone of voice. They anticipate disappointment before it even appears. They become emotional caretakers, often without anyone asking them to take on that role. Have you ever apologized before expressing an opinion? Have you ever said, "I'm sorry to bother you," before asking a perfectly reasonable question? Have you ever agreed to something immediately, only to spend the next few hours hoping the other person would cancel? If so, pause for a moment and ask yourself something different. What exactly am I afraid will happen if I simply say no? Will they be disappointed? Will they think less of me? Will they become angry? Or is there an even deeper fear hiding underneath? The fear that if I stop giving people what they want, they might stop wanting me. This is where Jung's work becomes profoundly hopeful. He believed that the unconscious only controls us while it remains unconscious. The moment we begin recognizing these hidden patterns, something remarkable happens. We create space between the emotion and the decision. Instead of automatically saying yes, we become capable of asking a question we may never have considered before. Is this choice coming from kindness or from fear? That single question has the power to transform not only the way we set boundaries, but the way we understand ourselves. There is something important that needs to be said before we finish. Feeling guilty when you say no is not proof that you've done something wrong. It is proof that your brain is responding to an old emotional pattern. The feeling itself is real, but it is not always telling you the truth. One of the biggest mistakes people make is believing that guilt is a reliable moral compass. Sometimes it is. If you've hurt someone intentionally, guilt can encourage accountability and repair. But there is another kind of guilt. The guilt that appears the moment you stop abandoning yourself. That guilt isn't a sign that you're becoming selfish. It is often a sign that you're doing something unfamiliar. Think about what happens when someone who has spent 20 years saying yes finally says no. Their relationships haven't changed overnight. Their values haven't suddenly disappeared. The only thing that has changed is the pattern, and patterns rarely disappear quietly. They resist. Your nervous system protests because it has learned that keeping everyone happy is the safest strategy available. Breaking that habit feels uncomfortable for the same reason learning any new behavior feels uncomfortable. Your brain prefers what is familiar, even when the familiar is unhealthy. This is why healing doesn't begin when the guilt disappears. Healing begins when you stop obeying it automatically. The goal is not to reach a place where saying no feels easy every single time. The goal is to reach a place where guilt no longer makes your decisions for you. Carl Jung once wrote that we are not what happened to us. We are what we choose to become. That transformation starts with awareness. The next time someone asks for more than you can honestly give, pause before answering. Notice what your body is doing. Is your heart racing? Are you already preparing an apology? Are you searching for an excuse instead of simply telling the truth? Those reactions are not character flaws. They are emotional memories. And memories can be rewritten. Instead of asking yourself, how do I avoid disappointing this person? Try asking a different question. What would I say if I believed my needs mattered just as much as theirs? That single question has the power to change the way you make decisions, the way you build relationships, and eventually, the way you see yourself. Healthy boundaries do not destroy healthy relationships. They reveal them. The people who genuinely care about you may feel disappointed from time to time, but disappointment is not rejection. Mature relationships have room for honesty. They allow both people to have limits without constantly proving their worth. If someone only values you when you are endlessly available, endlessly agreeable, and endlessly self-sacrificing, then what they love is not you. They love the version of you that never asks for anything in return. Perhaps that is the hardest lesson of all. Your value has never depended on how useful you are. It has never depended on how much you sacrifice, how often you rescue others, or how many times you put yourself last. You deserved love before you became helpful. You deserved respect before you became reliable. And you deserved to have boundaries long before you learned to ignore them. So the next time guilt appears after you say no, don't immediately assume you've made a mistake. Pause for a moment and ask yourself one final question. Is this guilt protecting my relationships, or protecting an old version of me that no longer needs to survive? The answer to that question may change far more than your ability to say no. It may change the relationship you have with yourself. If this video resonated with you, subscribe to Architecture of Emotions, where every week we explore the hidden psychological patterns that shape our thoughts, emotions, and relationships through the lens of Carl Jung, modern psychology, and philosophy. And before you leave, I'd like to ask you something. What is the hardest thing for you to say no to? Share your answer in the comments. I'd genuinely love to read your experiences, because sometimes the first step toward healing is realizing that you're not the only one carrying this invisible burden. Thank you for watching. And remember, the inability to say no is rarely a communication problem. More often, it is an old survival strategy, waiting to be replaced by self-respect.